Pursuant to Standing Order 1082, our study of the situation of rights and democracy in the International Center for Human Rights and Democratic Development. So we'll just wait for the cameras to exit the room, and then we will get started. Okay. So if I could just want to start off and thank our witnesses for being here today. Madame Trepanier, you're going to go first, and then I believe that Mr. Akavan will go afterwards. What we'll do is you have translation here if you haven't been in a committee before, where you can find the English or French on either channel, for depending on what you need or what you'd like. I will ask you to go first, Madame, and then if you could try and keep your comments to 10 minutes or around that. I'm not going to cut you off at 10 minutes, but if you could do your best, and then we'll do the same for Mr. Akavan, and then what we'll do is we'll go around the room, 7-minute round and a 5-minute round. We'll do the best we can. We get started a little late, so we'll try and go as close to 12 o'clock, maybe 5 after 12, and then we'll have our second panel. So once again, welcome. Thank you for being here. The floor is yours. And I will give you 10 minutes to get your opening statements.
Okay. Monsieur le Président,
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee.
all members of the committee for inviting me today and giving me this opportunity to testify on the events that took place in the months preceding and following my husband's sudden death. Let me start by saying that it is not easy for me to come before you today. I'm not a person who seeks publicity. But the wrongs that were committed against my husband are so serious that I feel that I have no choice but to share what I know. I hope you will understand that my first language being French, I will testify in French today. Mon nom est Suzanne Trépanier et j'étais l'épouse de...
My name is Suzanne Trépanier, and I was the wife of Rémy Beauregard, who, until he died on the 8th of January, was the President of Rights and Democracy. I asked to appear before you in order to correct the facts, because there have been allegations made about Rémy by some members of the board, including members of the committee, the evaluating committee, and they are false. I want the reputation of my husband to stop being tarnished by people who, in my opinion, are acting in bad faith and have been harassing him for many, many months. We're harassing him for many months, and this ended up with harmful effects on his health. My ultimate purpose today is to reestablish Rémy's reputation and to ensure that there will be consequences for board members who are responsible for the activities that I'm about to describe. I am the person who best knew Rémy. We were together for 29 years, and I was his best friend and his confidant, and we were always in love. This all ended dramatically on the 8th of January. I think it is important that you know who Rémy Beauregard was. He was a fervent advocate of human rights, and on a more personal level, he was especially interested in the rights of children, women, and seniors. He had a master's in public administration from the ENAP, and Rémy, throughout his career, always advocated for linguistic rights and defended the rights of the underprivileged. He was the director of the Ontario Human Rights Commission, and he worked with the Ugandan Commission. Rémy was a career public servant. In Ontario, he worked for the governments of David Peterson, Bob Rae, Mike Harris, and Dalton McGuinty. Rémy was non-partisan, and this was very important to him. Rémy was frank and open. He always respected authority, and he wanted to be respected. Respect was very important for him, whether it be at home or in the office. Rémy was a mediator, probably one of the best in Canada. He didn't like conflicts, and he always sought compromise to find a solution that was acceptable to everyone. Rémy was a simple man, a good man. He wanted to be able to say before he died that he had done everything he could to make a difference in the world. But unfortunately, in the very last hours of his life, it was his reputation that he was trying to save. Now, I'd just like to go over some events that have occurred over time. I think it's important because there are members who were very free with their accusations against Rémy, and he is no longer there to defend himself. One of the first complaints of the vice chair of the board, Jacques Gauthier, was in a memorandum on Rémy's assessment. He accused Rémy for having organized a dinner after a film without having invited him or the president of the board. This supper was organized at the very last minute. It was just a friendly and informal meeting after the film. I was with Micheline Lévesque, and I suggested that we go and have supper. The organizer of the event, the film producer, and the two Burman guests also joined us, and to my knowledge, the president and the chair and the vice chair had already left. Now, you may tell me that this isn't important. However, the chair and vice chair feel that this was proof of lack of loyalty on the part of Rémy. In that same memorandum and in his evaluation, Rémy was accused for acting illegally, for example, meeting and financing terrorists. These accusations were simply invented. Rémy felt that this harmed his reputation. In my opinion, these statements were made in bad faith. The chair and the vice chair of the board have insisted on making that point. Rémy gave a speech before 150 people, and yet he was told that this was a meeting with terrorists. They were government delegations. Now, with respect to Rémy's vote on removing 3 subsidies of $10,000, his comment was, "We should have done our homework better." And I'd like to point out that Rémy told me that he wanted to avoid any useless debates. His comment wasn't any sort of admission. It was rather that he was a mediator and he was trying to find a compromise. I was very angry to read on the 24th last an article by David Matas, who was interpreting what Rémy said before he died. He said
that those 3 grants, which he had spent so much time and effort defending, which, within the confines of the management and the board he had staked his personal reputation, were wrongly made. Qui est Monsieur Matas pour interpréter les pensées d'une personne?
Who does Mr. Matas think he is, being able to interpret someone's feelings once they have died? Was he with Rémy that night? In my opinion, this was made in bad faith. Rémy has been accused for never having been available for a meeting.
Keep up, and they're having a hard time. So if you slow it down just a bit, that'd be great.
Rémy has been accused of not having been available to meet with members of the evaluation committee. But I'll tell you who was available at the time, between the 20th of July and the 10th of October 2009. Rémy, 44, Oral Brown, 17, Jacques Gauthier, 12, Jean Guilbeault, 50, Danny Capote, 9.5, and Elliot Tepper, 0.5. So you'll have to agree with me that it is false that Rémy was doing all he could to avoid that meeting. Now, I'd like to talk about certain events that happened at the 6th of January meeting. I accompanied Rémy, and I heard everything from the other side of the door. I can assure you that Rémy tried very hard to defend his rights and his professional reputation. Mr. Guilbeault was on the committee, but neither Mr. Guilbeault nor Rémy received a copy of the modified report before the meeting. The vice chair refused to provide a copy to Rémy and told him that his hands were tied and that he could only speak with him verbally on the changes. Rémy insisted, and he was finally given a copy at the end of the meeting. The vice chair the report was only written in English. The vice chair was furious to note that Rémy had a note that was confidential, in which there was a reference to the ethnic origin of employees. Now, the question was asked why Rémy had that, and Rémy pointed out that it was a part of his evaluation. Rémy asked questions of the chair of the board on the errors in the report when he had been given a very good verbal report by members of the board during the March meeting in 2009. The board chair pointed out to Rémy that because he was a senior executive and very well paid, he would be perfectly able to defend himself without any assistance from committee members. Rémy suggested changes to the report, but the vice chair pointed out that he was not willing to make changes to the drafting of the report. A motion was voted, 3 against 1, and Remy insisted that it be pointed out on the record that the decision was imposed during that meeting that lasted for more than 2 hours. I felt the confusion of Remy, his level of stress, especially given that the chair was preventing him from speaking constantly. At the end of that meeting, he told me that he was going to challenge that evaluation and that he would lay complaints against 3 of the members because of their lack of professional respect. And that night, I told the members that I was very, very worried about Remy because he was under such stress. That night, Remy did not sleep. He told me that it was very difficult for him to face this situation. He had fought all his life and all his career to advocate for the rights of others, and he was not even able to advocate for his own rights now. Jacques Gautier's insinuations in the memo that was attached to Remy's evaluation were particularly disturbing for him, and it was very difficult for Remy to deal with the aggressive attitude of Aurel Brown, as well as from other members of the board. On the 1st of April, how could Mr. Matas have been able to talk about the performance evaluation of Remy for July 2008, March 2009, when he was only appointed as a member to the board in November 2009? Remy put that question to the chair of the board on the 6th of January and asked him about the note that was on his performance evaluation when he had only been in position for 3 weeks. I'd like to point out that these gestures, as well as the tone that was used, was disrespectful, shocking, and it was not appropriate on the part of members of a board, including the chair and the vice chair, especially of an organization that is supposed to advocate for rights for human beings and democracy. Here are some other events that I think are important. On the 7th of January 2010, Remy was very, very upset to learn at a meeting that the board chair had decided to change the agenda so that the report that Remy was supposed to present had been put off by a day to the 8th of January. I'll point out that Remy worked very, very hard to draft this report during the Christmas vacation because it covered the period from June to December 2009. For Remy, it was very, very important to go over that report at the beginning of the meeting because it would shed light on subjects that were going to be discussed afterwards. On the 8th of January 2010, there was a sudden death of Remy, and that was the beginning of a period of great stress for myself, and it is still as stressful for me. I received condolences from the board, but this was rather shocking because Remy had tried to meet many, many times in 2009 with Eileen Boyd, who was the Assistant Secretary to the Cabinet, Keith Christie as well, the Deputy Minister to Foreign Affairs, Jean-Maurice Duplessis was the Director of Operations in the Foreign Affairs Office, and Claude Carrière, who was an advisor on foreign policy at the Privy Council. Remy had tried to meet all these people to find a solution that was acceptable for a deteriorating situation, but his requests were never followed up on. I also received a letter from Minister Cannon in which he stated several times many compliments for Remy, but this was an affront because the minister never, ever responded to a request for a meeting with Remy on the 3rd of November last. There was a very, very positive evaluation of Remy's work during that same period by the minister and by Foreign Affairs, but that was not reflected in his performance report. In my opinion, the government did not do due diligence, and so there was bad governance. Now, on top of the stress for myself, I had to undergo further stress following his death. I received a letter of condolences from the chair, and I think that's hypocritical. And my own emails were in the media. There has been a suspension of staff, and I think that what this has done has complicated any administrative matters. Contrary to what was mentioned the 1st of April last by Jacques Gautier, the staff did not give me back Remy's computer. because he had left Montreal with his equipment to go to the board meeting in Toronto. After his death, I brought all Rémy's material back to our residence in Montreal. On the 1st of March, Mr. Gauthier required that I return the goods on the 3rd of March at 5 o'clock. I had assured that it was my intention to provide these goods, but I was in Toronto for medical reasons, and therefore it was impossible for me on the 3rd of March to do this. But I received a second notice giving me for the 5th of March at 12 o'clock as a deadline, and Mr. Gauthier said he would take legal steps. Contrary to what Mr. Matas said on the 1st of April, exchanges between Rémy and Eileen Boyd from the BCP confirms that the office was informed about the situation within the board and had been for several months. Rémy was not there when allegations were published 2 or 3 times in the National Post on 2007, and he was not there for several weeks, as Mr. Gauthier said on the 1st of April. It's very unfortunate that Rémy was surrounded by such a good team and that he had the confidence of his staff, but he was not extended the same courtesy by some members of the board. You'll agree with me that rights and democracy has not been spoken about as much as it has currently, and it's ironic to see that this kind of visibility is happening now. This crisis has been published elsewhere in the world, and one has seen it published in articles in newspapers like the FIDH and Gerald Steinberg, William Shabas, etc. I want to tell you that I will always regret that I supported Rémy's decision to accept his mandate with rights and democracy, not because of the organization or because of its staff, but because of the harassment that he had to undergo for several months and that contributed to increasing the stress to intolerable levels. I will never forgive myself to have not succeeded, despite all my efforts over the past few months of his life, to convince him to leave it. He kept repeating over and over that he would not accept that his reputation be attacked in such a manner, and that he would defend himself to the end, and that he would not resign because he owed that to the staff and to rights and democracy. That's the sort of man Rémy Beauregard was. For all those reasons that I've stated today, I would ask that the Privy Council remove this performance report and any notes that have been annexed to the file of my husband, Rémy Beauregard. I want public apologies on the part of the 7 members of the board who publicly criticized Rémy. I also want the 4 members of the board to be immediately replaced, those who have made defamatory remarks with respect to Rémy, that is, Oral Brown, Jacques Gauthier, Elliot Tepper, and David Matas. In my opinion, these board members do not understand their role, and they are acting against the interests of rights and democracy and imposing their own personal ideologies. I want a copy of my testimony to be tabled in the files of those 4 board members. I also want the government to demand that there be a public, independent inquiry so that light can be shed on all the activities and events that took place within the board at Rights and Democracy over the past year. Thank you very much, members of the committee, and thank you for giving me time today to speak to you. I hope that my testimony will have shed some light on the situation, and I'm sorry if it was too emotional. Thank you.
We're now going to move over to Mr. Ackerman for 10 minutes, sir.
Monsieur le Président et honorablement.
Mr. Chairman, honorable members of the committee, I'd like to thank you for giving me the opportunity to share my perspective with you on the events that led to the crisis within rights and democracy.
Because of my belief that justice should prevail over political expedience, it was very much to my advantage to remain silent. But faced with the abuse of power in an organization committed to human rights, I could not remain silent in good conscience. I was honored to be appointed by this government as a director on February 29, 2008. I was aware then that in December 2002, the Inspector General had issued recommendations to improve financial oversight and management staff relations. The board immediately began to implement these under Janice Stein, who was then the chair, and then under the presidency of Jean-Paul Hubert. Upon the appointment of Rémy Beauregard as president by the government on June 26, 2008, he successfully continued this process. In August 2008, the 5-year review of rights and democracy by Foreign Affairs concluded that the overall results of this review are positive and have confirmed the effectiveness and relevance of the organization's activities in the field. The Auditor General's June 9, 2009 report was also positive. In short, contrary to what the current chair, Oral Brown, asserted before this committee on April 1st, upon his appointment on March 11th, Rights and Democracy was not dysfunctional. But in the months that followed, the organization disintegrated as a minority of directors engaged in a hostile takeover. The conflict began within the board after Mr. Brown's first meeting as chair on March 26th. The board majority was highly satisfied with Mr. Beauregard's performance, but the chair instructed the secretary not to record this in the minutes. Mr. Brown and Gauthier were concerned about small grants to 3 organizations. As a compromise, the president agreed not to provide further funds. Mr. Brown also insisted that he should have a veto over all future grants. Again, we accepted a review procedure as a compromise. Mr. Brown and Gauthier opposed participation in the UN Durban Review Conference. But Mr. Beauregard had already decided to boycott this event with the unanimous support of the board. Instead of praising the president, these directors submitted a secret evaluation to the Privy Council with baseless accusations, half-truths and distortions that disregarded or minimized his successful leadership. It attempted to portray him as anti-Israel on the very issues that had already been resolved to everybody's satisfaction. The chair's harsh note to the report called it constructive criticism. To us, it looked more like character assassination. Earlier demands by the president and board majority to see the evaluation report were rebuffed, and a law firm was retained at the cost of $17,298 to justify the decision. When it was disclosed to the Privacy Act at the June 18th board meeting, the majority considered repudiating it. Again, as a compromise, we gave them an opportunity to amend it, and they agreed. Our trust was betrayed. There was no intention to honor this agreement. Instead, there was a plan to change the board to the liking of the chair and his allies. On September 4th, Ms. Donica Potti, the government representative on the board, suddenly resigned just 7 months into her 3-year term. She had earlier submitted a positive report on Mr. Beauregard on behalf of the government. With her removal, the chair was poised to get a 7-6 majority with 2 new appointments. On October 19th, Mr. Brown and his allies suddenly postponed a board meeting on just 2 days' notice. The board majority was excluded from this decision, which cost $15,000 in cancellation fees. Still short of a majority, they wanted to avoid consideration of the report, which they had failed to amend 4 months later. They also wanted to block reappointment of Guido Riveros Frank, a respected Bolivian democracy expert that Ministers Fletcher and Kent had regularly consulted. On November 8th, I wrote to Mr. Gauthier asking him whether there was an intention to gain, and I quote, a decisive majority of board members that will once and for all silence the dissenting board members and probably also set the stage for removal of the president and his senior staff. That is what I wrote to Mr. Gauthier on November 8th. Once the 2 new appointments were made on November 13th, Mr. Brown immediately called a meeting of the board for January 7th. Having secured a 1-vote majority, the Performance Committee met with Mr. Beauregard on January 6th at an acrimonious meeting in which they dishonored their promise to correct the report. At the board meeting, it became clear that this 1-vote majority intended to completely exclude the other half, having already decided everything in advance. For directors like Sima Samar, who had traveled all the way from Kabul to participate, this was greatly insulting. Some days earlier, in email exchanges relating to our concerns, Mr. Navarro Jenny, one of the directors, had referred to us as, and I quote, third worldists, comparing us to Robert Mugabe, and contrasted us to, and I quote again, Her Majesty's British North American subjects, end of quotes. As we had predicted, this had become a hostile one-party board, and the stage was set to remove Mr. Beauregard and management. When Mr. Riveros Frank was kicked off the board, it was the last straw. Dr. Samar and I decided to walk out in protest. It was a moment of utter shame. The resignation of a human rights champion from Afghanistan from a Canadian human rights agency. That day, Mr. Beauregard was visibly distressed, knowing he would probably have to resign with a stain on his reputation. Little did we know that this great friend and colleague would leave us for good shortly after. After his tragic passing, before his funeral could even be held, we were shocked that internal documents were leaked to Ezra Levant and Gerald Steinberg to continue smearing his reputation. The opinion editorials by the 7 board members against him were simply shameful. The call by 45 courageous staff for their resignation was an expression of respect for an admired leader and of loyalty to the integrity of the institution. In order to exact revenge, the same board has now hired expensive lawyers and private investigators to persecute the staff. This has already cost an estimated $500,000 of taxpayers' money. And in the new era of accountability that the board proclaims, they have amended a bylaw to retroactively justify awarding these lucrative contracts without tender, which only adds to other financial irregularities concerning the board's budget. We can only be thankful for this committee's oversight. In closing, I would note that the honorable members of this committee may have competing political agendas, but I'm confident that they all agree that unethical conduct cannot go without consequences. The smearing of Mr. Beauregard's reputation is a manifest abuse of power and probably also a violation of the Occupational Health and Safety Act. The Canadian Centre for Occupational Health and Safety recognizes that making false accusations against an employee is a prime example of workplace bullying and that such psychological harassment can have serious health consequences. Let us consider the allegation in Mr. Gauthier's famous memorandum that, quote, while attending a conference in Cairo in the fall of 2008, Mr. Beauregard met with representatives of Hamas and Hezbollah. Mr. Gauthier states further that the legality of these meetings is obviously questionable. He clarified during the June board meeting that he was referring to the Criminal Code of Canada. In particular, Section 83.18 provides that contributing directly or indirectly to the activity of a terrorist group is punishable by 10 years imprisonment. In his response to the board, Mr. Beauregard had said that this accusation is patently false and I consider it an attack on my reputation. So without a shred of evidence, a distinguished bureaucrat with a spotless record was accused of being a criminal. Which of the members of this committee would tolerate such behavior if they were the victim? In its great wisdom, this government appointed Mr. Beauregard as president. This committee must now unanimously ensure that justice prevails and that this great Canadian agency is salvaged. To that end, I would urge the committee to consider the following recommendations. First, to remove from Mr. Beauregard's record the evaluation report, including the chair's note and all other relevant documents, so that his name and honor can be redeemed once and for all. Second, to call on the Board of Directors of Rights and Democracy to issue an apology to Mr. Beauregard's family. Third, to call on the Chair, Mr. Brown, and the Vice Chair, Mr. Gauthier, and Mr. Tepper to resign because of their misconduct. And fourth, to consider reconstituting the entire Board of Directors in view of the tremendous damage to Rights and Democracy's international reputation and the loss of confidence by the Canadian public. That concludes my submission, Mr. Chair. I thank you and the committee for your kind attention.
And thank you, Mr. Ackerman. What we're going to do now is we're going to start over on my left-hand side here with Mr. Ray, 7 minutes.
Thank you very much. I want to just make a... Je vais faire une intervention très brève.
I just want to make a brief comment because I never said this clearly to the committee, that as a former leader of the official opposition Ontario and as a former Prime Minister of the province, I can tell you all very clearly, I knew Rémy Beauregard very, very well. I worked very closely with him, and I always found him to be a man of great intelligence and great integrity. And I have to say that because knowing him as I did over several years, I was, quite frankly, surprised by the comments that I read and heard like others did. Now, I would like to thank Ms. Trépanier for her courage in coming forward today. And in giving a very important perspective on the conflict that clearly existed within the board. And I think that these are statements that we cannot disregard because they testify to the problems that clearly existed within the board and the problems that ensued. And my first question is to Mr. Ackerman.
I was reading an article by Mr. Cooper, April the 7th, in the Calgary Herald. Mr. Cooper is a professor at the University of Calgary. I'm sure you're familiar with him. He claims to have received information from a member of the board, Mr. Marco Navarro-Geni, in which he states that between May 2009 and January 2010, Beauregard managed to turn, I'm quoting from Mr. Cooper's article, managed to turn several quote international members of the board against the Performance Review Committee by granting them favors, including travel perks, interns, and funding for projects in their home countries. These are serious allegations. Again, there seems to be a pattern on the part of board members of making very consequential allegations against Mr. Beauregard, which he's not in a position to respond to, which I must say I find deplorable. But since you are or were a member of the board, could you comment on this, and could you also comment on any allegation with respect to any conflicts which you yourself may have been under or allegedly were under during your time as a member of the board?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Ray. Rights and Democracy had three very distinguished international members. Mr. Riveros-Frank of Bolivia, as I mentioned, was consulted by Minister Kent, Minister Fletcher on democracy promotion in the Americas. Ms. Sima Samar is a recipient of the Order of Canada, one of the only people other than Nelson Mandela. Ms. Soyata Mega is the African Human Rights Commissioner on women's issues. So to make this kind of defamatory accusations against them, I think speaks to the attitude, frankly speaking, of the board and exactly what they did to Rémy Beauregard and anyone that stood in their way. Now, what's interesting is that the idea is that because a student intern was sent to Bamako, Mali, to assist Ms. Soyata Mega, that was the way that Rémy bought her vote. I mean, that's just astonishing to suggest that Sima Samar, who received $8 million for the Afghan Independent Human Rights Commission from CEDA over the years, was being bought by Mr. Beauregard. And the same accusation, which appeared strategically yesterday in CanWest, where I'm accused of having requested a nomination to a UN position, which is absolutely baseless. I have the email right before you where I asked for the advice of Mr. Beauregard in relation to a commission of inquiry for war crimes in Sri Lanka, which was not established by the UN and which this government promoted and which members of this government wanted me to participate in. I asked for his advice about a possible nomination. But if the greatest accusation they can come up against me is that I wanted to help the victims of mass murder in Sri Lanka, well, I stand guilty as charged. We have to remember that they have hired a private investigative firm and spent tens of thousands of dollars to go through thousands of Rémy Beauregard's emails. And this is the best accusation that they can come up with. I think they're not getting good value for their money.
Do you have any idea how CanWest would have received that email? I mean, presumably it's proprietorial to the board and proprietorial to the organization as well as to the investigative firm that was doing the work of going through the emails. Is that right?
Well, of course. It's the same way that Ezra Levant and Gerald Steinberg and others were given internal documents. But if I may just add, what I find astonishing is that Mr. Navarro-Jenny is making these accusations. Before Mr. Beauregard's death, I was exercising my duty of care as a board member, looking at the books of the board, and I noticed, for example, that Mr. Navarro-Jenny had been in Haiti on a mission of rights and democracy, and this was the same mission that Mr. Riveros-Frank had gone on earlier with the accusations of travel perks. Mr. Navarro-Jenny stayed 4 extra days for personal purposes, and he charged Rights and Democracy and received $1,300 for 4 days in which he stayed beyond the mandate entrusted to him by Rights and Democracy. I was astonished to learn as well that Mr. Jacques Gauthier, who had gone on a 6-day trip to China, received 11 days of fees from Rights and Democracy, totaling $3,575, whereas the other members of the delegation received $500 honorariums. And if I may just add, the budget of the board, which was $130,000 for the previous fiscal year, was already approaching $300,000 when I left the board. And a big part of that were honoraria that were paid to board members who come here and speak as if they're volunteers. The honoraria, which were budgeted at $40,000, were approaching $80,000 by the time I left the board. So it's very unfortunate, really, that they need to now start smearing the international members.
What is the practice with respect to board members are paid by under order in council? I mean, how does it? Can you make me familiar with what the pattern is?
Mr. Ackerman, I'll just get you to finish with that answer, and we'll move on. But go ahead.
Yes, board members are paid an honorarium for every full day of work that they do. And not for full days of work that they don't do.
If they travel, I mean, under what conditions do board members travel? Do they get the permission of the chairman of the board to go on a mission or something, and then they get paid for that, and their expenses are also covered?
Well, yes, expenses are covered. And getting back to Mr. Gauthier, if you are on a 6-day trip to China, why are you getting 11 days honorarium? So, I'm afraid that there will be further revelations that will have to be made about some of the payments that were made. If I may just conclude, one of the issues we have to consider is that Mr. Navarro-Jenny, who's been leaking this information to the press, was for a week at the Office of Rights and Democracy in a position as a senior advisor. We don't know what his mandate was, how much he was paid. The contract was given to him by fellow board member, acting president Jacques Gauthier. And was Mr. Navarro-Jenny perhaps receiving a very generous salary to go through the thousands of emails that the private investigators had discovered in order to find some dirt against me and international board members to leak to the media? Is this a good use of taxpayers' money? We have projects in Haiti, in Afghanistan. We have victims of sexual violence in Congo. And people are trying to go on a witch hunt against me and Dr. Samar. It's astonishing.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Ray, Mr. Ackerman. We're going to now move to Madame Lalonde for 7 minutes, please.
Merci.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'll be sharing my time with Ms. Deschamps. First, Ms. Trepanier, thank you for coming today. I understand that this is emotional. I also knew Mr. Beauregard. And I had great respect for him. We will be guided by your requests in this committee's work. You can be certain of that. Mr. Akavan. You have also provided us with a very clear report. Now you're asking that the board be completely restructured so that rights and democracy can once again become what it was. Before asking you to explain this, I'd like to ask you another question. You spoke about these 3 small grants, 2 to Palestinian organizations and 1 to an Israeli organization. And you said that this played a role in the development of this crisis. Now, over the weekend on Radio-Canada, there was a report on the NGO Monitor and its influence in Canada and Quebec. To your knowledge, is there any link between NGO Monitor, any connection between that monitor, any board members, and the positions that were taken on 3 small grants that were provided to 2 Palestinian groups and 1 Israeli group? Thank you, Ms. Lalonde.
Legitimate concerns about the demonization of Israel at the United Nations. And I've worked with the United Nations for 10 years. 80% of the resolutions are against Israel. Sudan, Iran, Myanmar, Zimbabwe, they all escape scrutiny. But I think organizations like NGO Monitor have gone too far. They have gone too far because they're suppressing all dissent. And the chair, Mr. Brown, had unsuccessfully attempted against the opposition of board members to invite Mr. Steinberg to address the board. And we know that one of the first articles that came out after the death of Mr. Beauregard was that of Mr. Steinberg, published in the Jerusalem Post, then in the National Post. He had access to internal documents of the board. The repudiation of these grants by Mr. Matus in his 15-page memorandum is based entirely on reports of NGO Monitor. So the link is clearly there. But I want to share with you what Mr. Yossi Alfer, who's a former advisor to Ehud Barak, the present defense minister of Israel, former director of the Jaffe Center for Strategic Studies at Tel Aviv University, this is what he has to say about NGO Monitor. He says that NGO Monitor seems dead set on eliminating human rights monitoring of Israel entirely and smearing anyone who supports this vital activity. This is a former advisor to Ehud Barak saying this. Within Israel itself, where I have many friends and colleagues, NGO Monitor is seen as a blatantly political far-right organization. And I'm baffled as to how this organization can have so much influence over an institution like rights and democracy. I also want to add that some of the representations that have been made, never mind B'Tselem, which is an Israeli organization, the chair says it's Israeli in name only. I mean, this is the language of the far right in Israel. We're basically saying that unless you're blindly obedient, you're a traitor to Israel. But even if we look at Al-Mezan, the organization in Gaza, which incidentally has also issued reports condemning the Palestinian authorities, condemning Hamas, calling for an investigation of Hamas rocket attacks against southern Israel as well, which is not mentioned at all. But it's interesting that in February 13, 2007, because of a lawsuit that was brought against NGO Monitor before the Israeli courts by the Institute for Applied Research in Jerusalem, a defamation libel lawsuit, Mr. Steinberg issued the following retraction, that he said, "I regret having called Al-Mizan an organization that justifies violence." This is Mr. Steinberg as a result of an Israeli court proceeding admitting that Al-Mizan does not justify violence. Now, Al-Haq is also interesting. The Israeli courts have never convicted Mr. Shawan Jabarin of terrorism. What they have said is that there is a travel ban against him, and this is what the U.S. State Department country report recently said about this Israeli court decision. This is the United States State Department Human Rights Report for 2009. On March 11, the Israeli High Court barred human rights defender, this is the U.S. State Department calling him a human rights defender, Shawan Jabarin, director of Al-Haq, a Palestinian human rights NGO, from traveling outside the West Bank without holding a hearing. This was an ex parte hearing. There was no chance to contest the evidence. Based on evidence that Jabarin and his lawyer were not allowed to see, the court refused to lift the travel ban imposed on him by military order in 2006. And I just want to end by saying that in a conflict zone, one will always encounter people who have had all sorts of different pasts. Mr. Ariel Sharon was accused by the Kahan Commission in Israel of war crimes in Lebanon, and he became prime minister. Now, the accusation of Shawan Jabarin, who was until 1987 member of the PFLP, is interesting because our own foreign minister, Maxime Bernier, met with Riyad al-Malik, the foreign minister of the Palestinian Authority, in December of 2008, I believe. Well, Mr. al-Malik was a senior member of the PFLP for many years, yet this government pledged to give $300 million to the Palestinian Authority. So the problem here is that there is a legitimate concern about demonization of Israel, one-sided attacks, but I think that NGO Monitor and other organizations have gone too far, and we are more extreme in Canada than people are in Israel. I have a student who's an Israeli Air Force pilot who flew bombing runs over Lebanon. He seems to be more reasonable about these issues.
Thank you. That's all the time we have. We're now going to move back over to the side to Mr. Abbott, 7 minutes.
Thank you. Madam Trepanier, it's very, very difficult for you to have come. I wish to express my sincere condolences for your loss. At a human level, it is far beyond anything that we can be discussing at this table. I thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Mr. Akavan, I want to get to some common ground with you, and so perhaps we could begin with legislation that sets out the rights and democracy. You'd be familiar with Clause 31.1. The chairman shall, within 4 months after the end of each year, transmit to the minister a report of the activities of the centre for that fiscal year, including financial statements for the centre and the Auditor General's report thereon. You're familiar with that clause, I'm sure. The other clause that I wanted to draw to your attention was from bylaws, bylaw number 1, paragraph 3. The Board of Directors appointed in accordance with the Act shall establish the policies which determine the activities of the centre and shall approve the annual budget of the centre. So we're on the same page.
Yes, of course.
Would it be a stretch if I was I'm sorry, one more, Clause 20. As provided by the Act, the President is the Chief Executive Officer of the Centre and shall supervise and direct the work of the Centre this is the important part, in accord with the policies established by the Board. Are you and I in agreement that the Board is in charge, or should be in charge, of the policies of the Centre? Absolutely, sir, yes. The entire Board, yes. Yes, I understand that. If the Board has the responsibility for establishing the policies and direction of rights and democracy, it seems to me that a lot of your testimony and testimony of others has stipulated that, in fact, the people, the President, past and present, and the staff should be telling the Board which direction to be going, should be establishing the policies. Am I misunderstanding? No, sir, you're not misunderstanding anything, and the staff never told us how to run the organization. We had very vigorous debates in the Board. I certainly never felt that the staff were dictating to me. We had a collegial relationship when we were the majority. We had critical discussions. I had many disagreements with Mr. Beauregard. They were always respectful. I don't think anyone is questioning that. I began by saying that the problem began in the Board. It was not a staff Board problem. It was a problem of a minority of a Board trying to dominate and eliminate the majority. That was the real problem, which then spilled over into relations with the staff.
And I must also add that this suggestion of staff rebellion, when I was at Remy Beauregard's funeral, one of the staff members came up to me after this letter was signed by 45 of the 47 staff members calling for the resignation. She told me, you know, we deal with people in Afghanistan and Congo who risk their lives for what they believe in. We are willing to risk our livelihood for what we believe in. They knew exactly what the consequences would be of their action, which means that this isn't just, as Mr. Matus says, people from the street who think they own the organization. These are people that put their livelihood at risk, and one must consider how extreme the circumstances would have been for them to do that. If I may also add, the suggestion that there was some conspiracy to achieve sort of a collective agreement in exchange for 45 of the 47 staff members to sign that letter, well, it's a remarkably creative theory, but it's very disturbing because the source of that accusation is one staff member, that same staff member who has made a complaint now to the syndicate saying he was pressured. What is disturbing is that on the day that the Director of Communications, Charles Valéran, one of the three managers that appeared before, on the day that he was dismissed, Mr. Gauthier tried to promote that one staff member to the position of the Director of Communication. And if you like, we can discuss the evidence of that. So here we have people being promised promotion for giving substance to conspiracy theory to smear the staff, a smearing of the international board members, a smearing of Mr. Beauregard. So it seems that everyone here is wrong except those few board members, and I just don't think it adds up.
I'm sorry, I don't mean to be rude, but we have a very limited time. You would be familiar with the tabling of the annual report. The bylaws clearly stipulate that the annual report would be tabled under the name of the chairman. In fact, the chairman, as I understand it from correspondence that I've seen, did not ever receive, or certainly did not receive, a copy of the annual report prior to it being tabled. And yet you're indicating to us by your testimony that there wasn't any conflict, there wasn't any difficulty between the people who were on the staff going ahead and doing their own thing without reference even to the chairman of the board. You were on the board at that time. You must have had an opinion about that.
Well, yes, I think that the chairman had a rather extravagant view of his powers. He thought, for example, that he would have veto powers. The majority of the board approved a grant for a project on indigenous rights in Colombia, and he claimed to have a veto power. But the point is that this report was discussed by the board. And I think that we have to be cautious about Mr. Brown's assertion that he never saw a copy of it. Maybe he didn't see the copy of the final draft, but we did discuss it, and he was involved in that decision.
But, Mr. Akavan, at the risk of getting into a debate with you, the point that I'm trying to make is that the staff members went ahead and were doing things and constantly did things. You talk about debate. I agree that there should be a debate at the board level between board members. It strikes me that what you're confirming is, in fact, there was a debate between the staff and the board is in charge.
There wasn't a debate. There was a discussion. For example, we had a 5-year strategic plan, which the board has now adopted, and we would invite staff members to make a presentation, and we would have discussions with them. I, as a board member, never felt that either Mr. Beauregard or the staff thought that they could dictate anything to us. But I do think that the majority of the board felt that a minority was trying to gain absolute power at the expense of the majority, at the expense of the legitimate powers of the Chief Executive Officer, Mr. Beauregard. And I can give you many incidents of mistreatment of staff members. We had Madame Cynthia Gervais in our Geneva office, who was interrogated in 2 conversations with Mr. Gauthier and Mr. Brown, and she resigned shortly thereafter because everyone knew that they wanted to close down the Geneva office, irrespective of what the majority thought. 2 staff members were interrogated because of their Middle Eastern backgrounds. There were many, many issues which we could discuss here about why the staff were so upset.
I respect that's your testimony, but you are fundamentally confirming that there was a conflict directly between the staff members and the board, and I am suggesting, according to legislation and bylaw, that the board has the responsibility for the organization to give direction to policy to the staff members.
I'm not confirming that. I'm confirming that a minority of board members had a conflict with a majority of board members and the staff, and I would add that board members under the Act must act in good faith in the best interests of the organization, which is why the majority at one point called for the resignation of the chair, Mr. Brown.
Thank you very much, Mr. Abbott. We're going to move over for the last questioner, Mr. Doer. 7 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to our witnesses. And in particular, I just want to thank Madame Trepanier for being here today. The fact that you have been I'll be frank, to be brave enough to come forward is exemplary, and the fact that you are here to share with us both the experience of your husband and also some of the facts that we need to know about what happened. So thank you very much for being here. And I'm going to just ask you a question around your comments with regards to his fight to have his reputation kept intact, and specifically, you mentioned that there had been an evaluation that was done without his consultation, and yet there was a verbal consultation with him about his conduct and his performance that was positive. And what did he say? Did he share with you, did he give you feedback about that positive verbal overview that was given to him by the board?
Naturally, when he came back from that meeting that day, he said that apparently there was, the board went... Je peux parler en français?
Oui, c'est bien. Ça va.
Can I answer you in French? The board had met in camera and had asked the staff to leave. And they made provided a positive performance that Mr. Gauthier actually presented himself in March. So he's given a very positive performance review. Afterwards, he learned that that there would be another performance review that had been put in his records and that was contrary to what had been stated in March. And he didn't understand. On the 6th of January, Mr. Gauthier explained, and I heard this because I was behind the door, he explained that he had modified that performance review because the one that he had given in March was more informal, but hadn't been as extensive as required. So he had completed that report afterwards, review afterwards. That's what he said. So, and that's everything actually changed in March when that president arrived.
Next set of questions is to you, Mr. Akhavan. You had mentioned that, and am I getting this right, that Marco Navarro Gini had actually been, according to you, had been hired by the board to do work for the board or for the Institute?
While Mr. Gauthier was acting president,
yes.
Apparently Mr. Navarro Gini was hired for a week as a senior advisor for an unspecified amount of funds for an unspecified mandate.
So while he was a board member, he was hired, as far as you can tell, by Mr. Gauthier to do work?
Yes, sir.
Chair, I think it's important for the committee to ask for that document. We've already asked for, I know Mr. O'Brien doesn't want transparency, but we've asked for contracts that had been engaged with by the board while Mr. Gauthier was the president. And to date, we have not received those. Is that correct? As far as you know? We have asked for the contracts for the law firm, for the private investigative firm, for the media firm, which we know was doing hard work when they came to the committee last. and we have not received that. I would also like to have a formal request to the board to have the contract of Marco Navarro Gini, because I was not aware of that. Are you aware, Mr. Akavan, of any instance where board members were hired to do contracts without tender, or were hired to do contracts, period, while they were board members?
No, it would seem self-evidently a conflict of interest for any board member to give a contract to another board member, let alone in these very questionable circumstances. As I said, I wonder whether, given the fact that Mr. Navarro-Joly has taken on the campaign of assault against myself and international board members, whether this is what he was doing in Montreal that week, going through the thousands of emails that the private investigative firms had dug up from Mr. Beauregard's computer to try and see if they could find any accusations against us. And if my wish to help victims of mass murder in Sri Lanka is the best that they can come up with, well, I'm afraid they're not getting value for their money.
Well, I might add, Chair, that it was Mr. Navarro-Gini who I believe called this committee and this process a gong show, and this is someone who's being hired at taxpayers' expense, as far as we can tell, and we don't know until we get evidence, hopefully soon, from this group, that he was being hired at taxpayers' expense to work for the President. This is highly disturbing and unprofessional and unethical. I'd also like to know from you regarding Mr. Gauthier. You said that he had been on a trip to China where there were other members who accompanied him, and it was for 5 days, and there was an honorarium or per diem paid to other members for 5 days, and that's the amount of work that was done, a 5-day billing, but that he'd actually stayed over for an extra 6 days or 5 days, correct me if I'm wrong, and he charged more for
that was Mr. Navarro-Joly. Mr. Navarro-Joly had been in Haiti, and he stayed an additional 4 days on what appears to be personal business. Based on the information available to me, I wasn't there, and he charged the honorarium for those days for a total of $1,300. And I was looking through the books in December, in part because the board budget was twice that what it had been. The board budget had never been twice over ever. And with respect to Mr. Gauthier, he was on a 6-day trip to China in December together with Mr. Beauregard and others. The others received a $500 honorarium, but Mr. Gauthier, based on the records that I saw, charged $3,575, including an additional 5 days for preparation. Now, Mr. Gauthier has a full-time law practice, and I'm not sure how he would have spent 5 full days to prepare for a meeting in China in which there were exchanges of pleasantries. And I think one needs to look very carefully at all the contracts that have been offered, including the contract that he had given himself. How many days did he receive payment for during the 66 days that he was president? We have contracts to Border, Ladner, Gervais, Deloitte & Touche, Ogilvy, Renault, Woods, which is a big law firm in Montreal, Circo Security Systems, Prima Communications, Mr. Auger, who quit after 1 week as Director General, a position which never existed, Mr. Navarro-Joly. And I've estimated, I used to work in a law firm partners, Deloitte & Touche charge $500 to $600 an hour. So if you add it all up, if you have an average of 1,000, 1,500 hours, we have $500,000 of funds which have been spent in just a 1 or 2 month period. And in times of austerity, when everyone is speaking about wise use of taxpayers' money, for a human rights organization to do that is unthinkable.
Thank you, Mr. Dewar. It's all the time we have, and I just want to once again thank the witnesses for being here today. What I'm going to do is we're going to just change over witnesses because we've got a couple others that are coming. So once again, thank you very much. We're going to take 1 minute to do that so we can get right back at the next round. Thanks. we're running short on time, and I don't want to reduce any time from the questions and from our testimony. So we'll just give a second here for the cameras to leave, and then we'll get started.
Mr. Broadbent first.
Okay, and I just want to welcome Mr. Broadbent, Mr. Almond, both no strangers to this place. Mr. Broadbent, we'll just start with you. You've got 10 minutes, and then we'll move it to Mr. Almond, and then we'll have a round or two, if we can, of questions and answers. So, Mr. Broadbent, welcome. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you very much. It's good to be back. I am pleased to come before you today, and particularly pleased in that context to see some former colleagues from all parties with whom I enjoyed working when I was a member of the House of Commons. Unfortunately, the occasion for my appearance is extremely troubling. A unique Canadian institution, Rights and Democracy, is now dysfunctional. And according to voices I respect at home and abroad, and I have spent the last 3 months in London and heard lots about it, it is quickly losing its reputation for integrity and independence. In my brief comments, I want to say something about the nature and mandate of Rights and Democracy, the roles of the Chair and the President, and finally, the disastrous consequences for the late President, the staff, and the international reputation of the institution that resulted from the actions of a handful of incapable, intolerant, and mean-spirited individuals. In doing this, I will be elaborating on the letter that I and 3 other former presidents of Rights and Democracy sent to the Prime Minister on January the 13th. Although all 4 former presidents were Privy Council appointees, the Prime Minister has not yet replied to that letter. As members know, Rights and Democracy, while created by an act of Parliament, by law functions at arm's length from the government of the day. In its mandate for encouraging human rights and democratic development abroad, there are 2 points that I want to stress today. The first is the emphasis that is found in Clause 4, Section 1 of the Act on A, human rights, and B, the International Bill of Human Rights. This clause makes clear the agenda for the Centre is not to promote our particular form of parliamentary democracy or our Charter of Human Rights and Freedoms. This is not a Canadian imperialism light mandate. I would also draw your attention to the crucially important Section 2A, identifying what it calls, and I quote, the major object of the organization, which focuses not on the political processes of democracy as such, but on a crucial objective of the Centre, that is to help reduce the gap between what some states are formally committed to in human rights or in their own constitutions, on the one hand, and on the other hand, what actually takes place within these nation-states. This wording was brilliantly constructed and became the foundation for so much of the Centre's activity in countries like Guatemala, Mexico, El Salvador, Peru, Kenya, Rwanda, Tanzania, Thailand, and Pakistan, all of which had been committed in principle in varying degrees to a range of international human rights, but at the same time, at the time of the adoption of the Act for the Centre, were failing to meet the international standards. I would emphasize 2 points here. First, the wisdom revealed in the Act is that in broad terms, human rights come first. Many states, for example in Latin America, for a good part of the 20th century, had so-called competitive elections. But what they lacked was freedom of speech, freedom of association, the freedom of the press, and the rule of law. Thus, as the broad sweep of Western European and North American history, I believe, has shown, the core foundation for a real democracy is a society that embodies universal rights, which now include social and economic rights. Without human rights, so-called elections are a sham. Hence, the Centre in most, but not all of its activities, has supported human rights activists and programs in developing countries. In partial recognition of this fact, and I suspect most members won't know this, and there's no reason they should, the words democratic development were added by amendment to the Centre's title in the Senate, not to balance in any way human rights against democracy, but to make it clear that the emphasis on rights is precisely what is involved in democratic development. I want now to emphasize the importance of rights and democracy's reputation for complete independence from the government of the day, and independence that has now been shattered, I believe. Mr. Mulroney and Mr. Chrétien and their foreign ministers understood this very well. They revealed this understanding in two ways. First, by appointing people to the board without a partisan agenda. As we all know, a government can impose a partisan agenda simply by making carefully selected appointments without any need for explicitly partisan instructions going to the appointees. The previous prime ministers carefully avoided doing this with rights and democracy. Secondly, they expected rights and democracy at times to be in open disagreement with them on international human rights issues. Third, if I may say so, they appointed as presidents people they believed would act in this independent manner. As President of Rights and Democracy, I openly advocated the inclusion of workers' rights clauses as outlined in the Covenant on Economic and Social and Cultural Rights in all international trade agreements, and the speedy adoption of an international covenant on rights of indigenous peoples. Whether in substance or emphasis, such positions, and on a few other matters, were at variance with the government of the day. At no time did I receive criticism from the Prime Minister or Foreign Minister. Indeed, during the 1990s, our activist work on the ground in many developing nations, I and my staff were frequently facilitated in our work by those fine public servants working on human rights issues in our embassies abroad. In my view, it was because of rights and democracy's reputation for knowledge and independence of the government of the day that when I requested a meeting with President Clinton in the White House, or asked for a meeting with the King of Thailand, or the presidents of Guatemala, Mexico, Rwanda, or Eritrea and Kenya, among others, these requests were granted and the meetings took place. The day rights and democracy becomes known not for its independence on rights matters from the government of the day, but for supine acquiescence to the party political agendas of the day, will be the day that foreign governments and NGOs alike will cease to be interested in the opinions of rights and democracy. If they want the Canadian government's view, they will simply call in the Canadian ambassador. Now something about the roles of the chair and the president. According to the Act, the prime purpose of the chair is to preside over meetings of the board, as well as to take on other particular duties as might be assigned to him or her. The president, as its chief executive officer, quote, has supervision over and direction of the work and staff of the Centre, end of quote. In plain language, the chair of the board is not the CEO of the organization. It's the president who has and exercises the power of the CEO. When the board of the Centre makes its decision on broad policy directions and major grants, it is then up to the president and his responsibility for the day-to-day operations of the Centre to hire and supervise the staff and to make other decisions required to implement those objectives. The staff, notably the management team, are responsible to him and to no one else. Neither the chair nor any other member of the board has a right to impinge or encroach upon the president's authority to deal directly with the staff. Early in 2009, when Mr. Braun became chair of the board, he came to an organization in a very good state of morale. Within the previous year, it had not only received an excellent annual report on efficiency from the Auditor General, but in addition passed with commendation the 5-year review conducted by the Department of Foreign Affairs. Its recent program on women's rights in Afghanistan have been singled out for praise by CEDA. In short, it's a matter of public record, not opinion, that under Mr. Beauregard's presidency, the management and staff were operating efficiently, transparently, and responsibly. In contrast, after the arrival of Mr. Brown as chairman, to use the words he wrongly applied to the staff, it is the board itself that has become dysfunctional, has embraced a culture of dogmatism, and finally lacks transparency. I would add that it has also been since the arrival of Mr. Braun that the Board of Rights and Democracy has lost 2 of its distinguished foreign members, one by resignation and the other failing to get reappointment, has been criticized by the International Federation of Human Rights, was criticized by William Shabas, the distinguished Canadian head of the Irish Human Rights Centre, and to complete the ignominious list, has had its judgments contradicted for the first time ever by Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International. In responding to questions about these matters, I will be very happy to elaborate. In the course of all these developments, and following the tragic death of the President, Mr. Brown is probably the first chair of a public institution in Canadian history to have inherited a highly praised management team, as well as an exceptionally educated and dedicated staff, and then by extraordinary mismanagement, united them in virtual unanimity in a vote demanding his resignation. If ever there was a cause for this dismissal of a public appointee on the grounds of gross incompetence, this is it, and I hope this committee will recommend it. I have never, to my knowledge, ever before called for the public dismissal of a public official. I am doing so today. And if I may, on a personal note, I'd like to conclude by saying something about a key member of the management team who has been singled out for particular criticism by some members of the board. Marie-France Cloutier has worked over 19 years for the Centre, the first 6 for me in a senior position throughout my term as president. In all my years of public life, I never met a more competent or more loyal subordinate. She was a loyal employee, but she never hesitated to speak truth to power. That such a fine person and public servant was so arbitrarily dismissed says more about those who now run the Centre than it does about her. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And thank you, Mr. Broadbent. We're now going to move over to Mr. Allman for 10 minutes.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, I want to first thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today respecting this important issue. As you know, I served as President of Rights and Democracy from 1997 to 2002, and furthermore, I was a Member of Parliament in 1988 when the Centre was established by an Act of Parliament. Today I want to speak about the mandate of the Centre, its independence, how that independence was exercised during my mandate, its accountability and transparency, and the relationship between the President and the Board, and the relationship between the Centre and the government. I will also comment on how much of this has changed since March 2009 with the appointment of several directors, including Aurel Braun, as the chair of the board. The mandate of the Centre is set out in Section 4 of the law. In a nutshell, it is to defend and promote democracy and human rights, and in particular, those rights set out in the International Bill of Human Rights. In other words, the governing imperative for the Centre is the International Bill of Human Rights. The governing imperative is not the foreign policy of Canada. It is not the foreign policy of the United States, and it's certainly not the foreign policy of Israel. and the Center is directed by law to be totally independent in pursuing that mandate, in pursuing that governance imperative. Rights and democracy, therefore, carries the flag of human rights. It doesn't carry the flag of Canada, the United States, or Israel. And it has the mandate to monitor and condemn human rights violations as it sees them anywhere in the world, including Canada. In this respect, the Centre is to act independently at arm's length with respect to all governments and all political parties. This is set out in various ways in the Rights and Democracy Statute and bylaws. Section 22, the Centre is not an agency of Her Majesty, that is the government. Section 23, the Chair, the President, the Directors are not part of the Public Service of Canada. Section 19, the head office shall be in Montreal, not in Ottawa, where you have the head of government. Section 28, the Centre was to receive committed 5-year funding to assure its independence. Furthermore, in appointing the Canadian directors, the Minister must consult with the Leader of the Opposition and the Leader of every other recognized party in the House of Commons. And in addition, in appointing the Chair and the President, the Minister must also consult with the existing Board of Directors. Once again, to ensure the Centre's independence and the preeminence of its mandate. When Joe Clark, a Conservative minister, appointed Ed Broadbent, a New Democrat, as the first president in 1990, he set an example for this principle of independence. He appointed a person not of his party whom he knew was a champion of human rights. Once appointed, Ed's governance imperative was the International Bill of Human Rights, not the policies of the Government of Canada, nor the policies of the NDP. Of course, the purpose of this independence is that it gives credibility to the Centre, credibility in dealing with other governments, credibility in dealing with international bodies, and credibility in dealing with other human rights organizations. The principle of independence, in turn, is reinforced by the UN Paris Principles, by the UN Declaration on Human Rights Defenders, and by the Vienna Declaration on Human Rights of 1993, which states the international community must treat human rights globally in a fair and equal manner on the same footing and with the same emphasis. In other words, you don't pick and choose, supporting some rights here and other rights there, or verifying or varying the enforcement of human rights from country to country. Well, how was this independence exercised during my mandate as president? Of course, we had people on the board who came from different professional, social, ethnic, religious, and political backgrounds. But when they came to the board, they were committed to the mandate of the Centre and acted as such in their decision-making. There were times when we differed with the government of the day and we criticized their policies, as we did with respect to the WTO, the Inter-American Free Trade Zone, the ratification of the American Convention on Human Rights, and the implementation of economic, social, and cultural rights, including the right to water and the right to food. However, despite these public differences and criticism, there was no attempt to silence us, no attempt to pack our board with other points of view or to threaten funding cuts. We did consult with each other on issues, but when there was a disagreement, the government accepted that as part of the game that results when you have independent human rights organizations. On the other hand, there were times when governments, including Canada's, backed the same policies as we did. And then we worked together to have these policies implemented. This was the case with the International Criminal Court, the Protocol on Children in Armed Conflict, the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, and the Inter-American Democratic Charter, and others. It is absolutely clear, Mr. Chairman and gentlemen and ladies, that what has been happening since March 2009 is totally inconsistent with the traditions that I've referred to, totally inconsistent with the statute and bylaws of rights and democracy, with its stated mandate and its requirement of independence. It is evident that since a certain date in 2009, the government has been packing the board with individuals whose principal concern is to shield Israel from all criticism whether deserved or not, which is also the policy of the Harper government and the Netanyahu government. These individuals, now 7 including the chair, come to the board with biases against the UN, biases against the UN Human Rights Council, biases against human rights NGOs, and a bias with respect to the Middle East conflict. The evidence for these biases is found in their own written articles and statements, in their associations and partnerships, in their actions and history. If you read the long statement by David Matas in Ezra Levant's blog of January 24th, it confirms exactly what I'm saying. When we speak of partnership, we are not talking about Conservative Party membership. We are talking about political biases which are similar to the Harper government's and which are contrary to the Centre's mandate, contrary to the International Bill of Rights, and contrary to the Vienna Declaration. While it is normal in a free society for political parties to have such biases, it is not acceptable for Rights and Democracy, which has a legislated mandate to monitor and advocate for human rights wherever it is necessary to do so. In this case, the 3 grants to Middle East NGOs were authorized under the Urgent Action Program. Mr. Braun and his colleagues have said, contrary to substantial evidence, that the issue at Rights and Democracy is not with policy, is not with the Middle East, but it's with respect to accountability and transparency. But this program, the Urgent Action Program, and its budget, and all programs and budgets of Rights and Democracy are approved each year by the Board of Directors. They are audited each year by the Auditor General's Department. The audited reports are printed in the annual reports, which are tabled in Parliament, posted on the website, and distributed widely. In turn, the President and officers of Rights and Democracy are subject to oversight by this parliamentary committee regarding the annual report and the audited financial statements, which has been done on many, many occasions. In addition, the Rights and Democracy statute requires that every 5 years there must be an independent, in-depth evaluation of Rights and Democracy. These have been done in 1993, 1998, and 2003. None of these 5-year evaluations, none of the annual Auditor General audits have ever indicated that the Centre was operating contrary or outside its mandate, or that the Urgent Action Program or the office in Geneva or even the attendance at the Durban Conference in 2000 were out of order. According to the Rights and Democracy statute and bylaws, the role of the board is to provide general policy direction, to approve the annual budget and work plan, and to oversee their implementation. It is not the role of the board to micromanage the Centre. According to the statutes and bylaws, the President has the responsibility to administer and run the Centre, including the hiring and management of the staff. The President is full-time. The board is part-time. The recent actions of the Chair and the Board of Directors to repudiate grants, to close the Geneva office, to freeze the Urgent Action Program, to fire employees, to gag and manage staff, to question their religious affiliations are all prompted by their political biases and not by their obligation under the statute to govern in accordance with the International Bill of Human Rights. This can also be said of the attempt in 2009 by Mr. Gauthier, Messrs. Gauthier, Tepper, and Braun to rewrite and change Mr. Beauregard's evaluation. In conclusion, in order to strengthen the Centre's independence, I want to make the following recommendations. First, that there be an outside independent inquiry into the situation at Rights and Democracy. I appreciate the hearings that this committee is conducting, and they are worthwhile, but they are too short and incomplete to really get to the bottom of things. Secondly, I think that you should consider amending the Act to strengthen the nomination process. And third, you should reintroduce the policy of multi-year funding, which was there in the first place but was forgotten about afterwards. That multi-year funding gave more independence to the Centre. Mr. Chairman, Rights and Democracy plays an important role for both Canada and the world. What has happened to it recently is totally unacceptable, Since rights and democracy is the creation of Parliament, it's Parliament's responsibility to correct the damage as quickly as possible. Thank you.
And thank you, Mr. Aller. We're now going to move over here for the first round to Dr. Patry and Mr. Pearson. 7 minutes.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Broadbent.
Thank you, Mr. Broadbent and Mr. Allman. Thank you for coming this morning, and I'll be sharing my time with Mr. Pearson. I just have a brief, simple question. As former presidents of Rights and Democracy, I'm sure you've been following the recent developments very closely. My question is this. Do you think there's been political interference over the past several months?
I hesitate in saying yes, but I want to be clear on how that can be expressed. You can have political interference in an agency that's supposed to be independent in human rights, like the Centre, in one of two ways. One, a minister or a prime minister says, before I appoint you, I want you to put emphasis on P, Q, and R policies. That's direct. The other way, much subtler, but can be equally effective, is you appoint people who you know in advance are going to pursue that agenda. You know from looking at their dossiers. You look what they've said publicly in the past about certain issues, and you appoint them to the board. It's the latter, in my view. The Prime Minister of Canada is directly responsible for the appointees to the board. They come from the Privy Council. I cannot believe he did not know about the reputation of Mr. Brown and Mr. Gauthier before he appointed them. I cannot believe that he didn't think they would pursue a particular political agenda that was sympathetic to his government.
Thank you for coming in. Look, this is a dog's breakfast. I think of 4 different things. I think of the organization. It's obviously now in a state of crisis. It's our job, I think, to try to figure out how to right that ship again. Mr. Beauregard, if what we have heard today is true, and if we discover that it's true, this man's reputation has been maligned, perhaps beyond repair, unless we as a committee take our responsibility seriously for his reputation. Third, I'm very worried about what's going on the ground. I'm not asking about that today, but how are our partners overseas perceiving this difficulty that we're in at the moment and what we're doing with it? And finally, this committee. I think in any language, in any political language, this is a dog's breakfast. It is something that we have to deal with. You have had experience coming to committees before, both of you, in the capacities that you had within Rights and Democracies. We have a responsibility as a committee to get it right and try to not make politics as much a part of it as it might be. I wonder if you could offer advice to us as a committee. I'm not saying you're telling us what to do, but as a committee, as somebody who's worked with this committee in times past, how should we approach this problem? And what do you think are the actions that we should take that might be able to remedy what it is that's happened and can get this organization back up and on its feet?
Yeah. Well, in the statute right now, it says that the minister is supposed to consult with the opposition parties with respect to all appointments to the board. That's been done over the years, but I doubt whether the opposition parties, and I say that with respect, often paid as much attention to that as they maybe are now. One of my recommendations is that you reconsider how these nominations or appointments are made to the board. I would even go so far as to say that they should receive they shouldn't be just consulted on, but receive at least the support of one of the opposition parties. Some sort of situation where it's not just the government. I pointed to the good example that Joe Clark made in the first place when he set up the Centre to show a model. He, as a conservative, appointed a New Democrat, and I also I was looking at the foreign policy statement of the government in 1995, which was a Liberal government. In that foreign policy statement, they praised the International Centre for Human Rights as being an outstanding player in international human rights affairs. Here you had a Liberal government praising an institution set up by a conservative, run by the former leader of the New Democrats. In my view, that is a nonpartisan approach to human rights and the institution of rights and democracy. So I urge you, Mr. Pearson, to look at a new way a better way of making these nominations. And I understand that there was supposed to be a whole new process for order and council appointments by the Harper government, but it's never really come to fruition. For all appointments, not just these.
Can I add just one point to this? I think the situation requires some immediate action. I deeply believe this. We've got I believe the wrong person as president and the seriously wrong person as chair. You've got a wonderful staff who did what they only could do, I believe, in rebelling against it, to preserve the soul of the center, as a matter of fact. They did what they did. I think Mr. Brown has to be removed, and I would like to make a suggestion. If the committee seizes itself of a number of suggestions that have been made, I'm just focusing on one here, Mr. Brown should go, and the Prime Minister should undertake to speak to the leaders of each of the opposition parties and say, let's agree now in the interim, for now, on some distinguished Canadian, man or woman, that we can all agree on to put in on an interim basis to give some leadership to this organization, and then make, as others have suggested, follow a different kind of an appointment process down the road. But I do want to stress, I think some immediate action is required to preserve that institution.
Thank you both.
Thank you. Madame Lalonde, 7 minutes, please.
I'll be sharing my time. Thank you. Thank you. And I'd also like to say that I think Rémy Beauregard would have liked to be here to hear you speak so clearly on why and how he came about to experience such difficult circumstances. You've stated this very, very clearly, and you've also stated how important independence is, with means that you have suggested, and this is what he would have wanted. My question is this. Without important changes, and given that the committee should deal with this, rights and democracy will not be the same institution if some important changes aren't made. There have to be immediate changes, immediate, significant changes, such as those you have indicated. Do you agree? Yes, I agree.
Appointment process that maybe the committee could consider. There is already, I think, Mr. Harper has promised, consistent with proposals made by a number of parties when he first became Prime Minister, to have a very different appointment process, that there would be hearings and so on, and he hasn't proceeded with that. But one idea, in fact, the first board of the Centre came recommended to Mr. Clark and Mr. Mulroney by Gordon Fairweather, who had been the Human Rights Commissioner of Canada. So Mr. Mulroney and Mr. Clark, to their credit, they went to Mr. Fairweather, who had been appointed by Pierre Trudeau, by the way, as Human Rights Commissioner, and they got him in consultation to prepare a list for the first board. And I can tell you, before I accepted the offer from Mr. Mulroney, one of the first things I did was to look at the proposed list of the board, you can be sure. And there was a good cross-section of Canadians, representing then, in part of their past, all the political parties. Most of the people on the board had not political connections, but some did. And there was a great range. They all had a common interest in human rights. But the process was impeccable. You had a Human Rights Commissioner making a proposal list to a government, and the government was prepared to act on that. Maybe something like that could be tried in the interim, to come back to the need for some immediate action at the Centre.
Mr. Ullman, do you have anything to add? Well, I have made recommendations. Thank you. I would just like to add a few comments. We heard Ms. Trepanier's testimony, and we've heard your testimony today. Now, I look at the past 4 years, and I'm concerned about how the Government of Canada's policies now are becoming involved at all levels. I was on the Status of Women Committee before I came to this committee. And I would say that women were probably the first victims of changes in this government's policies. All groups that advocate for rights and all those groups that promote rights seem to be the first victims here. It looks like, well, I would say that I'm quite shocked and angry about what's happening. This doesn't reflect my values. I think my values are being taken away. I think that in Canada there are supposed to be values of fairness and justice and equality. And what I see now is a complete change of direction. And we as citizens don't see ourselves in this change in direction. Now we have a crisis in rights and democracy. And over time, this organization has acquired a good reputation, a strong reputation, an international reputation. How are people abroad perceiving what's happening here now with this crisis?
The last 3 months in London, England, and I came back just for this hearing, and I'll be returning. And I can tell you, coming through London, there are not, in addition to a number of international NGOs, there are government people from, I'm not going to exaggerate the number, but from personal contacts and media people, and I can tell you the reputation of Canada, and what hurts me is the reputation of the centre is going down. People are aware of the centre internationally, people who are concerned, not everyone, I don't want to distort this, but those who are concerned about human rights abroad are very much aware of the history of the centre and its particular role. And it has spread throughout the globe, literally now, in the NGO community and to governments, Scandinavian governments and others, who are sensitive on human rights matters about what's happening to rights and democracy. And there is very real concern.
Well, with respect to the first part of your question, there seems to be a pattern emerging in various organizations, not just rights and democracy. I'm also affiliated with Kairos. I look at Aboriginal issues. And for several months, similar problems have occurred.
Of a case regarding Aboriginal peoples before the Canadian Human Rights Commission, which is being delayed and delayed over and over with respect to Aboriginal children. So your comments, I find, are ringing true, that this, what's happening at Rights and Democracy is happening in other places as well, with respect to women's organizations and so on. With respect to international comment, it's interesting, you know, David Matas in his famous statement on Ezra Lamant's blog accused those who made the grants to these three groups in the Middle East of being ignorant. It was very condescending, his language, ignorant of what is going on in the Middle East. In other words, they didn't know what they were doing. Recently, about 3 or 4 weeks later, we had a statement made by Bet Salem, by the leader of Bet Salem, saying that those at Rights and Democracy who had repudiated the grants, they were the ones that were ignorant of what was really going on in Israel and in the Middle East. And so then there was also a statement signed by about 6 or 7 or more human rights organizations in Israel and the Palestinian territories criticizing the decision. There was a letter signed by over 100 lawyers and professors in Canada condemning the situation. There was Mr. Shabas, who's head of the human rights, who's a Canadian, but now head of the human rights body in Ireland. So there's already been a lot of comment internationally about this, and it's certainly not helping our reputation as a human rights organization.
Thank you very much. We're now going to move back over to Mr. Abbott for 7 minutes.
Mr. Ahmed, I always like to try and find common ground with people, and I think you and I are in agreement on Section 7, Bracket 2, on the necessity to consult. I'll read it again. All appointments to the board shall be made after consultation by the minister with the leader of the opposition and the leader of every other recognized party in the House of Commons. So we should put on the record that Mr. Ignatieff, Mr. Duceppe, and Mr. Layton approved all of the directors who are on the board of directors. And for them to be sitting there wiping their hands and saying, oh, we didn't have anything to do with it, is really quite an amazing sight. However, I do have a question for you. You seem to have a bit of a fixation with Mr. Matus. What is it? I don't quite understand. You're suggesting that Mr. Matus is a lapdog of the Prime Minister, that he's parroting the kind of things that this evil Conservative government might be trying to propagate. Is that what you're trying to say?
On your first point first, the fact that the leaders of the opposition parties were consulted doesn't mean they approved. I don't know what their reaction was when they were consulted. So I'm not sure how they responded to the Prime Minister when he approached each one of them. It's true that he has to consult, but I don't know what the response was, whether they approved or not. The appointment power is still left in the hands of the Order in Council, of the Prime Minister and the Order in Council. So whether they disapproved or approved, I don't know. And maybe you could ask them. We could find out how they responded to the consultation. With respect to Mr. Matus, Mr. Matus was on the board previously when I was the president, and at that time he was a constructive member of the board, although he, even at that time, on occasion seemed to be more interested in apologizing for the being as an apologist for the State of Israel than for human rights in the world, but not as extreme as he is now. But when I read, Mr. Abbott, his long, and he sent me a copy of that long statement that he made, which was on Ezra Levant's blog on the internet. It's full of attacks on the UN, on the UN Human Rights Council, on NGOs. I was surprised at his very strong attack on human rights NGOs, on many things. I mean, it would take me a whole meeting and maybe an hour to respond to all the points that he has in letters, but that's the difference between, I have no personal differences with Mr. Matus, but it's the statement that he made which shows that his main concern is protecting the State of Israel from any criticism, whether deserved or not. And I just can't agree with that. And also, more or less supporting this concept that if you criticize Israel, you're anti-Semitic, which I find really ridiculous.
If we could go politician to politician here for just half a second, I find it really quite breathtaking that you would be attacking a person who, by his own submissions to this committee, called himself a prairie liberal, and we also know that he is a Nobel Peace Prize nominee. I find that really quite breathtaking.
Well, you know, he was a liberal candidate, but that doesn't, you know, that says nothing about his bias with respect to the State of Israel. He has got this extreme bias. For example, in the Durban 1 conference, he walked out before the government conference even started, whereas Erwin Cutler stayed and fought the battle to make sure that the government conference came out with a proper declaration which was correct. It's the fact that he's a liberal or not a liberal has nothing to do with it. It's his bias on this particular issue, and it's the same bias with the whole 7 of these people, as far as I can see, that's causing the problem.
I suggest to you, gentlemen, that you are bringing partisan politics into this issue, and it is unbecoming because, after all, this is supposed to be a nonpartisan organization.
Well, let me answer that. You asked a question to the previous witnesses in which you put forward. You said, isn't the board supposed to make the policy for the organization? That's right, but the policy that they make has to respect the governance imperative that I referred to, which is total respect for the International Bill of Human Rights. You can't make policy or do things which are outside the mandate, which is in Section 4 and following. So yes, you can make policy, but it has to be policy which respects that mandate. And what we have here are policies, things being done by the board, which are outside, in my view, the mandate.
Can I comment?
The parliamentary mandate.
You use plural there, and we referred to both of us. I'm trying to remain. I take a position, but I'm trying to be nonpartisan about it, and I mean that. I had on my board a distinguished conservative, former MLA from Alberta. He was known for his human rights. He was on my board. Never once did he try to make a partisan issue, the government of when I had a conservative government, that we should ever follow a conservative agenda. He stuck to the human rights mandate. And to get back to David Matas, I, as an NDP, we haven't exactly formed a government yet at the federal level. But if I were our Prime Minister, I'd love to appoint a Liberal to do my dirty work instead of someone in my own party. So why wouldn't, if you have Mr. Matas, never to my memory has he come to the defense of Palestinians, and has always defended very often very offensive actions by the government of Israel. Why not? Why wouldn't the government put Mr. Matas on and say, well, look, he's a Liberal? My point earlier was you put people on, doesn't matter what party label they have, that will pursue their agenda.
What you two men are saying is anybody who disagrees with you is a partisan.
No,
and
no,
you're not.
we're saying,
that's an amazing position.
That's not correct. We're saying if you disagree with the mandate. We had conservatives, we had NDP on the board. They respected the mandate of the organization, which is, I say, a governance imperative that you act in accordance with the International Bill of Human Rights. That's your governing imperative. You do not act with respect to protecting certain states from criticism or criticizing other states that don't deserve it. You use the International Bill of Human Rights as the standard. By the way, when you appoint a speaker in the House of Commons, once he becomes speaker, he leaves his politics behind. It's the same with the people on the board. They should be on the board of rights.
Are you both saying that this is really all about Israel? Is that what you're saying?
We're going to move.
Is that what you're saying?
I would say yes, much of it is.
Thank you, Mr. Abbott. Mr. All, we're going to move to Mr. Dewar for the last, well, I won't say the last word, but certainly the last round.
Yeah, thank you. Well, we could take longer. Chair, I just wanted to start off by, I think one of the things that needs to be put on the table here is that was referenced but needs to be reinforced, and that is that Mr. Beauregard worked for, NDP premiers, Liberals, and Conservatives, and, Mr. Harris, who, I'll never be accused of supporting in any way, shape, or form. But I will certainly observe that Mr. Beauregard was able to work with Mr. Harris on the issue of human rights. And it is telling that when it comes to this affair, we have someone who is able to work with anyone, not able to work with this particular board. And I say that as an observation because I think some would like to have this be structured as, well, the board came in to deal with a crisis and a problem. And I would make the observation is that the crisis was created by these members, and it's very evident here. I mean, after we've heard, I go back to the testimony of the board members that, and others that, they were not only micromanaging, but they were having their hands in changing the minutes. I think of the Durban example, where, it was never refuted by Mr. Braun that he actually asked to have the minutes changed, but changing the record to reflect that it wasn't the board, or sorry, it wasn't the president and the staff who had made the recommendation not to go to Durban 2, that it was him. That we have now examples this morning from the previous witnesses that we're giving contracts to fellow board members. Mr. Beauregard, according to this committee, according to the Attorney General, according to the Department of Foreign Affairs, was doing everything in concert with what his role, his mandate was. And I have to agree with the recommendations that have been made that we need to do obviously something immediately. And we can discuss as a committee what they are. I would use a medical analogy. We have to do triage first to save the patient, and then we have to make sure that the patient is whole and healthy. But clearly we have to do something. To do nothing is not an option. So I would ask Mr. Amon, in your experience, when you had to deal with when there was evaluation done by the board of you, were you always made aware of the evaluations before they were finished and signed off? Did you participate in that process?
Well, they prepared the evaluation, but they would show them to me, and I never tried to change them. I just let them go.
Right, but you were aware of what was in the evaluation.
But they were discussed by the entire board. It wasn't done by a small committee of the board. The small committee might have prepared the initial document. I can remember very well. I was asked to leave the room when they discussed my evaluation, and I left the room, and I was later showed the evaluation. I had no problem with it. They were free to make whatever evaluation. I might say the evaluation was positive every year. Of course, having seen it, I didn't have too much to disagree with.
But there wasn't a separate process, is my point.
No,
and you were made aware of what the evaluation was.
As I pointed out, there was never an attempt by the chair. I had three chairs. One was Maureen O'Neill. The next one was Lois Wilson. The next one was Kathleen Mahoney. They were strong personalities, and they each one of them brought the evaluation when the time came to the full board. The full board discussed it and approved it. Then they sent it on.
Same with you, Mr. Broadbent?
Yes.
Okay. Chair, I say that because clearly there is a change in the way that the evaluations have been done in the past and what we have right now. I think the appointments process, and I have to maybe disagree a little bit with my friend Mr. Abbott. We were consulted, for instance, on the appointment of Mr. Latulippe, and we're going to hear about him on Thursday, but as far as I know, no one agreed to his appointment, and he was appointed. And I think further to that, and I want to get our witnesses' opinion, I am someone who has a conflict of interest when it comes to the Public Appointments Commission, because I was on the committee for Bill C-2, the Accountability Act, where we made amendments to have a Public Appointments Commission. It gets $1 million a year, but it, alas, has no real process other than the PMO. And so nothing has changed other than there's $1 million there for the government to dispense of appointments at their will. And I note that yesterday that became a problem because one of the appointments made to the IDRC has become a problem because of which commission she sits on is a conflict of interest in the view of the Gates Foundation. But I think at least in this period that we should have this committee to be able to question appointees before they are appointed to the board and as president. And would that not be, you mentioned, I think, Mr. Broadbent, that at least to confer with the leaders, and I think Mr. Amon said the same, we could do that, or we could also have this committee question the appointees as well, in light of the fact we don't have a Public Appointments Commission. Would that be another way of doing it?
I'd separate it out. As I said, I have a real concern about the staff and the continuing credibility of rights and democracy when you have, and you're going to talk about Mr. Latulippe, that kind of man who is president and Mr. Brown is chairman. I think some immediate action is needed to change the chairperson. And I'm not sure you'll get a rapid agreement by a whole committee of the House on that person. But for other appointees going down or other steps, it would be good if this committee of, cross-party lines could do it. That's why I said it seemed to me maybe the most efficacious if the committee recommended that, for a start, the chairperson, who is responsible for all the other activity going on ultimately and to this committee, if he was replaced, then I would hope that the Prime Minister would agree to sit down with Mr. Ignatieff and Mr. Duceppe and Mr. Layton and say, let's get a Canadian man or a woman now that no one's going to dispute has integrity on an interim basis, and to get them in there so that to restore faith in the staff and to bring some order, and it'll be difficult, I think, to the existing board still until longer range decisions are made about changing board membership.
Thank you, Mr. Dewar. That's all the time we have, and I want to thank our witnesses again. I apologize, been working under some tight time constraints today, but thank you very much for taking the time to be here. Meeting is adjourned.